Early in August of 1862, General Robert E. Lee accumulates a variety of evidence that foretells the departure of the Union Army of the Potomac from its position below Richmond on the James River. On August 9th, Major General Stonewall Jackson narrowly thrashes Nathaniel P. Banks' 2nd Corps of the Federal Army of Virginia in the Battle of Cedar Mountain, fought north of the Rappahannock River near Culpeper. Jackson has succeeded in barely snatching victory from the jaws of imminent defeat at Cedar Mountain. The rebel victory in that battle intimidates Major General John Pope, thus seizing the initiative from the Federals and placing it into Robert E. Lee's hands. McClellan's imminent flight and Banks' defeat offers General Lee the opportunity he covets. He orders the Army of Northern Virginia's right wing under Major General James Longstreet to march northwest and join Jackson near Gordonsville, which has the vital rail junction of the Virginia Central Railroad linking Richmond with the Shenandoah Valley in Northern Virginia. Lee's job will be to suppress Pope before McClellan can reinforce him. Jackson and Longstreet bring some 55,000 soldiers to the task, most of them veterans of the victories around Richmond and the peninsula, and Lee's lieutenants suffer from none of the shortcomings that handicaps Pope's corps commanders. James Longstreet has distinguished himself as Lee's most effective subordinate during the 7 days battles, and will remain a trusted, if occasionally controversial, member of Lee's inner circle throughout the entire war. Jackson's fame exceeds Lee's at this stage in history. The Virginian's reputation earned at the Battle of Manassas in 1861 and in the spring Shenandoah Valley campaign makes him the most admired and feared figure in the Confederate Army. Indeed, it is Stonewall who urges Lee that the United Rebel Army should strike Pope immediately. 2 small Federal divisions under Jesse L. Reno, a portion of Major General Ambrose E. Burnside's command for North Carolina, now rebranded the 9th Corps of the Army of the Potomac, have already arrived in the area via Fredericksburg, augmenting Pope's strength along the Rapidan. If the Confederates move quickly against the Federal left flank, they can sever the reinforcement pipeline from Fredericksburg and catch Pope's whole army with the Rappahannock River at its back, possibly crushing it in the process. Lee agrees, but opts to delay the attack until Southern cavalry under his nephew, Brigadier General Fitzhugh Lee, can execute a raid to destroy the Orange and Alexandria Railroad Bridge across the Rappahannock in Pope's rear. By August 17th, both Longstreet and Jackson are poised in concealed positions south of the Rapidan, waiting for Fitz Lee and the signal to launch the offensive scheduled for the next day. Unfortunately for the Confederates, no one has told the young cavalryman that Lee's plan depends upon his prompt appearance. Fitzhugh Lee tarries en route to collect supplies, forcing his uncle to postpone the advance. Even these revised plans come to grief on the night of the 17th. A mounted Union patrol splashes across an unguarded ford on the Rapidan and surprises Confederate Cavalry Commander Major General Jeb Stuart at his headquarters early the next morning. Stuart barely makes good an escape, which costs him his cape, a new plumed hat, and a great deal of pride. One of Stuart's aides also falls captive to the Union intruders, surrendering 2 satchels of dispatches he carries containing Lee's orders for Pope's undoing. Thus warned of his impending demise, General Pope begins a hasty withdrawal to the Rappahannock, crossing that watery barrier on the night of the 19th to the 20th. We little thought that the enemy would turn his back upon us this early in the campaign, Lee tells Longstreet in a feeble attempt to joke about the disappointing turn of events. The Confederates pursue, many of them fording the Rapidan, guiltless of any clothing below the waist, but they cannot prevent Pope from placing the Rappahannock between them and their quarry. The Federals thus score the first strategic point of the new campaign. As the armies glare at one another from opposite banks of the Rappahannock, each commander confronts a quandary. Pope has to provide a secure corridor for reinforcements from the Army of the Potomac. Those fresh troops might arrive from Fredericksburg, requiring Pope to protect his left flank downstream on the Rappahannock. McClellan's units can also disembark on the Potomac at Alexandria and employ Pope's direct supply line, the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, to reach the front. Major General Pope knows that this avenue might be breached by skirting his right flank and gaining his rear, necessitating Federal vigilance along the upper Rappahannock. The man in charge of coordinating the rendezvous between Pope and McClellan, General-in-Chief Henry W. Halleck, finds his task overwhelming and provides Pope little guidance. Halleck does encourage McClellan to hasten the movement of his army to Northern Virginia, but Little Mac pursues his assignment with glacial speed, a function both of his natural inclination and his loathing for the arrogant Pope. Lee's dilemma centers on the realization that he must find a way to engage the Federals, but forcing a downstream crossing of the Rappahannock would expose his army to an attack from the direction of Fredericksburg while shortening the distance that Union reinforcements must cover to reach Pope. Thus, the Confederate commander looks upstream to the north and west to find means of outwitting Pope's defenders. On August 21st, a small body of Southerners slip across the river at Beverly Ford, but the Federals react quickly and Lee recalls his men. The north side of the Rappahannock physically dominates the south bank, and Pope skillfully exploits his geographic advantage. Consequently, Lee shifts even farther upriver, authorizing Jackson to cross at Sulphur Springs, 9 miles above Beverly Ford, and approving Jeb Stuart's suggestion to conduct a cavalry raid behind Pope's lines. He boldly conducted a ride around Pope as he'd done to McClellan on the peninsula 2 months earlier. On August 22nd, General Jackson manages to maneuver a reinforced brigade with a battery of artillery across the river before dark. Heavy downpours that night swell the Rappahannock beyond fording stage. However, Jackson works furiously the next day to re-establish contact with his isolated and vulnerable units. Meanwhile, General Stuart leads some 1,500 troopers on a daring raid around Pope's right flank, descending after dark on Catlett Station along the O&A Railroad. Not only does Catlett provide a home for most of Pope's headquarters in Penamenta, but the railroad bridge over nearby Cedar Run offers a tempting target for Stuart's cavalry raiders. If the Confederates can destroy that span, Pope's supply line will be broken, and, perhaps, the Federals will be compelled to relinquish their tenacious grip along the Rappahannock. One of the marauders remembered that at 7:30 p.m. on August 23, 1862, in the midst of a torrential thunderstorm, the bugles rang out, half a note of the stirring call. The rest was drowned out by a roar like Niagara. From 2,000 throats came the dreaded rebel yell, and at full gallop 2,000 horsemen came thundering on. The Battle of Rappahannock Station, also known in accounts as the Battle of Waterloo Bridge or Battle of Freeman's Ford, had begun. The attack catches the rear echelon headquarters staff and their small infantry guard by complete surprise. The cavalry rode among the tents and their shock knocked some of the officers out of bed, said one Union observer. Every man, white and black, high and low, fled on his own hook. While some of Stuart's despoilers pillaged the well-stocked encampment, others attempt in vain to set fire to the saturated bridge over Cedar Run. After midnight, Major General Stuart rounds up his high-spirited horsemen and heads back for safe crossing on the upper Rappahannock. Stuart's failure to destroy the railroad bridge robs the Catlett raid of its primary strategic potential. The flashy cavalier does, however, assuage his bruised ego by avenging the loss of his plumed hats. Among the prizes gathered at Pope's headquarters tent is the Union commanding general's full-dress uniform coat. Stuart writes Pope suggesting a cartel for the fair exchange of the prisoners, to which he receives no response. As a result, Stuart has Pope's splendid garment displayed in the picture window of a Richmond store and elsewhere in the Confederate capital, where it attracts crowds of amused spectators. More meaningfully, Stuart shows General Lee captured correspondence verifying the rapid approach of McClellan's men from both Fredericksburg and Alexandria. In fact, Brigadier General John F. Reynolds' Pennsylvania Reserve's division has already reached Kelly's Ford on the Rappahannock while the rest of Fitzjohn Porter's 5th Corps marches a day behind. Major General Samuel P. Heintzelman's 3rd Corps of the Army of the Potomac has landed in Alexandria and awaits transportation to the front. Clearly, the window for Lee to strike at Pope under numerically favorable circumstances is closing fast. On August 23rd, the Confederates faced a more immediate problem of extricating Jackson's men from the north bank of the river near Sulphur Springs. While Major General Franz Sigel slowly descends on the unsupported Graycoats, Jackson completes the construction of a new bridge late in the day and removes the relieved troops before dawn on the 24th. But within 24 hours, Jackson will have them back across the Rappahannock, this time in much greater strength. This movement will result from a council of war conducted on August 24th by General Lee at the village of Jeffersonton. The white-bearded commander explains his intention to send Jackson's entire left wing, some 24,000 men, on an ambitious march around Pope's right flank to alight somewhere in the Union rear. Building upon the concept tested by Stuart at Catlett Station, Jackson's force will fracture Pope's supply line and thus persuade the Yankees to retire from the Rappahannock defenses. From there, the Army of Northern Virginia will respond to whatever strategic opportunities the situation presents, including a chance to strike Pope with advantage or a possible movement into Maryland. No matter the potential rewards, Lee's scheme involves great risk. Longstreet's division will occupy Pope's attention along the Rappahannock during Jackson's flank march. But the wings of the Confederate Army will be dangerously divided. Should Pope discover Jackson's detachment before Longstreet can close the gap, half of the Confederate infantry faces mortal peril. Moreover, Lee knows that every day might bring fresh units of McClellan's men into the equation. Confederate strategy in the Northern Virginia campaign thus rivals the audacity of any grand plan of the Civil War. General Lee accepts the risky gamble because of his confidence in Stonewall Jackson. Old Blue Light relishes assignments such as this and uses his experience in the Shenandoah Valley as a model. Early on the morning of August 25th, Jackson assembles his 3 divisions, issues orders for an ambitious, disciplined march, and begins a journey that would take his troops 25 miles before day's end. Richard S. Ewell's division leads the way. Ewell served under Jackson in the Valley, and the 2 Virginians have established a relationship of trust and mutual respect. Jackson's largest division, that of A.P. Hill, follows Ewell. Hill possesses substantial military talent leavened with a fiery temper and an oversensitivity to criticism, and has already run afoul of his infamously unforgiving commander. Jackson's old division, now under Brigadier General William B. Taliaferro, brings up the rear. Jackson thinks little of Taliaferro and by year's end will rid himself of a man he considers unreliable. The column wades a branch of the Rappahannock, tramps across fields, and negotiates streams heedless of any specific highway. Their northward orientation leads them to a point near Salem, where the weary Confederates fall to earth for a short night's rest. A movement of this magnitude cannot go unnoticed. Indeed, early that morning, alert Federal signal stations had spotted Jackson's column, and before noon Pope obtains an accurate idea about its size and direction. What the Yankee observers cannot decipher is Jackson's ultimate destination, and here Pope stumbles. Instead of retiring for the Rappahannock to block Jackson's approach, protect the supply base at Manassas Junction, and prepare to unite with McClellan's units moving south from Alexandria, Pope concludes that the Confederates are shifting away from him towards the Shenandoah Valley. Pope's error allows Jackson on August 26 to turn east and pass without interference through Thoroughfare Gap, a narrow defile in the Bull Run Mountains. This craggy range of hills presents the only natural obstacle between Jackson and the railroad. Likewise, safe passage through Thoroughfare Gap provides the key to Longstreet's eventual rendezvous with Stonewall somewhere on the plains of Manassas. Old Pete has done his job well and leaves the Rappahannock late that afternoon, but by then Jackson has covered more than 50 miles in the 34 hours since his departure. The march has been a rapid one and the soldiers were weary, faint, and footsore, admitted one participant. But all the labors of the past 2 days would mean nothing unless Stonewall can take advantage of his perilous position in Pope's rear earned by the exertion of his legendary foot cavalry. General Pope's supply depot at Manassas Junction, the uninhabited intersection of the O&A and Manassas Gap railroads, offers the greatest reward to Jackson's exhausted brigades. But Stonewall opts to steer his men first towards Bristow Station, a whistle stop several miles southwest of the junction. Seizing Bristow and wrecking the nearby bridge over Broad Run would cut Pope's direct rail connection with his base and place a free-flowing obstacle between Manassas and its dependent Union Army. Moreover, Jackson learns that only a handful of Federals guard Bristow, and he speculates that Manassas might be better protected. Early in the evening of August 26, Stonewall's cavalry escort swoops upon the startled Pennsylvanians carelessly encamped around Bristow, dispersing them with ease. Just then, a whistle blast alerts the Confederates to the approach of an empty Federal supply train returning to Manassas from the front. Although the gray-clad raiders attempt to block the tracks, the engineer barrels through occupied Bristow, eventually spreading the word that a Confederate force has once again gained Pope's rear. But his warning does not reach the next 2 trainmen, who fall victim to Jackson's vandals. One after the other, the locomotives careen off the broken and barricaded rails, creating a spectacular scene of destruction. Had the cars been loaded with soldiers, Jackson's men would have captured or killed them all. The only Yankees in the neighborhood, however, are 4 miles up the tracks at Manassas. The junction's small garrison responds to the engineer's alarm by deploying infantry and artillery, who prepare to resist what they believe to be another cavalry raid similar to Stuart's foray against Catlett. Despite the late hour and the dusty miles already logged that day, 60-year-old Brigadier General Isaac R. Trimble volunteers 2 of the regiments from his brigade for the task of capturing Manassas. Supported by some of Stuart's cavalry, Trimble pounces on the overmatched Unionists about midnight. Our boys gave them our best, but they were so close that artillery only got in about 2 or 3 shots apiece, when, in overwhelming numbers, they were right among us in the darkness," reported the federal commander. Most of the Unionists surrender. Jackson has thus brilliantly accomplished the first portion of his assignment, but his ultimate achievement would depend on the Federals' reaction. To his credit, Major General Pope sees opportunity where others might have panicked. The Federal commander reasons that an undetermined fraction of Lee's army has advanced beyond its immediate supports, offering a rare opportunity to crush his enemy in detail. Pope directs his 66,000 men along the Rappahannock to abandon their positions on August 27th and fan out along an 8-mile arc between the Warrenton-Alexandria Turnpike on the left and the Onay Railroad on the right. Major General McDowell, in command of his own 3rd Corps and Sigel's 1st Corps, would take the Turnpike. Reno and Philip Kearny's division of Heintzelman's 3rd Corps would occupy the center, while Heintzelman's other division under Major General Joseph Fighting Joe Hooker, followed by Porter's 5th Corps, would tramp beside the tracks towards Bristow, Manassas. Banks, still recovering from Cedar Mountain, would guard the Army's wagons in the rear. 30 miles east of Manassas Junction, Major General Halleck responds to what on the night of August 26-27th he assumes to be only a cavalry incursion. With the assistance of the energetic Chief of Military Railroads, Herman Haupt, Halleck assembles a reinforced brigade under George W. Taylor to move toward Manassas, expel the pesky raiders, and re-establish rail communication with Pope. Halleck also instructs McClellan's newly arrived 6th Corps under Major General William B. Franklin to march towards Gainesville on the Warrenton Turnpike and unite with Pope's expanding army. Pope and Halleck, unable to communicate with one another because Jackson has clipped the telegraph wires between Washington and the Rappahannock, have thus unknowingly orchestrated a potent envelopment of Jackson's isolated wing. Some 80,000 Federals are converging on Manassas from opposite directions, and if all goes well, Stonewall and his 3 divisions might be eliminated. As the sun rises on Wednesday, August 27, 1862, however, Jackson's first concern is to reinforce Trimble at Manassas Junction. Stonewall leaves Ewell at Bristow to protect the Confederate rear and marches with Generals Hill and Talfer to the Union supply base. The sight that greets the ragged Confederate scarecrows boggles their minds. At the junction was a large depot of stores and 2 trains containing probably 200 large cars loaded down with many millions of quartermaster and commissary stores, gushed one rebel. Besides these, there were very large sutlers' depots, full of everything. In short, there was collected there, in the space of a square mile, an amount and variety of property such as I've never conceived of. Before the awestruck Southerners have a fair chance to sample this inspiring cornucopia, Jackson's pickets announce the appearance of enemy troops. Hill's brigades first repulsed a heavy artillery regiment en route to Manassas, but Brigadier General George W. Taylor's 1st New Jersey Brigade offers a larger target. The Garden Staters confidently approach to within a few hundred yards of Jackson's concealed defenders before the landscape explodes in a fury of lead and iron. The brave Yankees stand their ground for 10 minutes, ignoring Stonewall's personal appeals to surrender. But numbers soon determine the outcome of this lopsided contest, and Taylor retreats precipitately toward Bull Run, losing a third of his men and suffering a mortal wound. News of Taylor's disaster soon reaches Washington, where George McClellan has at last arrived to take command of the Peninsula veterans intending to succor Pope. Instead of hastening Franklin's 10,000 fresh rifles to the front as Halleck intends, Major General McClellan cancels Franklin's advance. "I have no means of knowing the enemy's force between Pope and ourselves," McClellan tells the General-in-Chief. "I do not see that we have force enough in hand to form a connection with Pope, whose exact position we do not know." Herman Haupt tries frantically to persuade McClellan of the need and practicality of releasing Franklin, but Little Mac will hear none of it. McClellan had written his wife a few days before that, "I do not see how I can remain in the service if placed under Pope." And now his excess caution will ensure that the despised Illinoisan would control no more of the Army of the Potomac until McClellan approves. Meanwhile, Taylor's defeat allows Jackson's victorious regiments to indulge in what would possibly be the happiest day of their military lives. "I saw the whole army become what appeared to me an ungovernable mob, drunk, some few with liquor, but others with excitement," remembered a Louisiana chaplain. Actually, the pious and prudent Jackson has taken steps to discard the tempting intoxicants stashed among the delicacies stockpiled at Manassas Junction, but the rest of the booty presents fair game for the butternut desperados. The hungry men eat their fill and then stuff their pockets and haversacks with a variety of edibles, drinkables, and tradables. Ewell's brigades do not share in the initial revelry because they find less pleasant employment in combat with the vanguard of Pope's army at Bristow Station. During the afternoon, Hooker's division approaches from the depot from the west and clashes with Ewell for an hour in what becomes known as the Battle of Kettle Run before the Confederates execute a textbook withdrawal. The rebels cross Broad Run, firing the bridge in their wake, while the bloody and exhausted Federals lick their wounds at Bristow. Ewell's men do reach Manassas at dusk and help themselves to what remains of the Union supplies. But one of Ewell's officers complained that the other troops have appropriated the provisions of a more enticing character. With the Confederate success in the Battle of Kettle Run and their bold flank attack around Pope's Army of Virginia, Stonewall Jackson is now in a position to do more damage to the Federal forces. He knows that Lee and Longstreet with the right wing are en route to reunite with his command, at which point the Confederates could concentrate and force Pope into a battle on the ground of their choosing. During the night of August 27-28th, Jackson will begin moving his left wing into a new defensive position near the old battlefield of Manassas, intending to bait Pope into attacking him. The stage would now be set the next day for the start of the Second Battle of Bull Run, or Battle of Second Manassas.